Welcome to Power of the Network. I'm your host, Tim Locker, Vice President of Broadband here at CBM. Today, we've got a real special guest joining us, Mr. Jim Lucy. He is the editor-in-chief of Electrical Wholesaling Magazine. He's been in the industry for over 40 years, dear friend of ours here at CBM. He's got a journalism and writing background. He's got a passion for diving deep into the industry, trends, data, analysis, et cetera. So without much more ado, let's get into our conversation with Jim. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. Longtime friend to CBM. You've been in the industry for 40 plus years. I can't thank you enough for coming in and chatting with us today. But I have a question. Did you, what do you consider yourself? Are you a publisher, a journalist, a writer? Define,
Sure.
kind of how you started, how you got there, and like what you feel like you do.
Yeah, that's a great question. Particularly in today's market now, with all the different ways you can get content out. Where podcasts like today, I came up at the time the traditionalist journalism major at college, and kind of eventually enjoyed feature writing, which kind of kept me going. Got into the electrical market and just found a lot of people that just loved it, and they were kind of my mentors. And I kind of said, hey, they were making a good living. They seemed to be really liking what they did, so I kind of stuck with it. But part of it's part of it is writing. Part of it's news reporting. Part of it's maybe a little bit of teaching. As you get to know a little bit more. But now I think I find even more you have to really decide where do you want your content to go. What does it make most sense in a podcast, a post online, shorter? Then you can think of people are looking at this stuff on their phones. They're not necessarily sitting down and reading it. We happen to be all digital right now, so it's kind of a combination. But I guess a writer still, that's kind of my core, I think.
Kind of the writing? Okay.
I think that's the thing. And we were talking a little bit earlier about, I find with podcasting, I find that when I have good podcasts, I get the same kind of thrill out of talking, learning about someone, about their company as I did with writing an article on them. So it's good solid content, I think.
Okay, so that's a good point there too. And so Electrical Wholesaling Magazine, right? That's your editor-in-chief of that. And you'd mentioned up to about last year, you were still in print, and now it's all digital.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that transition. I know it wasn't like, sure, if the magazine just went out of print, that transition started way back, many years ago. Talk a little bit about that transition and how that's been for you.
Yeah, but the magazine started in 1920, so we were around and put over a good solid 100 years in print. And really, it kind of came down. Our mission statement was always, even digital and print, it's kind of two things: helping our readers run their companies more profitably and to sell more electrical stuff. Really,
sure.
those are the two major things. Yeah. So we were for many years a subscription-based publication, and but as as markets matured, as advertising matured, and as people who wanted to reach in the audience, advertising became more and more of a revenue source, and really the primary source of revenue for most publishing companies.
Sure.
Although there's events, there's some different things as things are emerging. So things changed like that, and we just were finding that more and more people, they were interested in advertising digitally, not as much in print. And print has some cost with it. You got the mailing, you got the paper, you got something keeping updated with the list. So they made and we've been publishing or had a website since the late 1990s. We always did many things digitally, but we decided to kind of, I wouldn't say pull the Band-Aid off, but it was a tough decision that we knew it was coming. And I think
there's a lot of history there that you don't want to let go, obviously.
And I'm very sentimental about it all. I got boxes and boxes of files of the pictures and people that I met and rolled everything. But I have to say it's been good. The transitions really worked well. Advertisers responded. We're hitting all our numbers, and it's worked out much better. I didn't know what to expect, but much better than I thought.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I guess talking a little bit about advertising, obviously, you guys are in it to make some money, CBM's in business to make money. That's what makes the world go around. But do you think when you, does it change your writing or your message at all when there's, dollars coming in behind it? Do you feel like you still keep that honest journalistic approach?
Yeah, you got to do the right things right. There's certain there are people aren't going to read our stuff if we're pandering to a big advertiser,
Yeah.
And that's not saying I mean, personally, I think I know where to draw the line. I can have a good relationship with advertisers and talking if they say, hey, we got this new product out, please put it up for consideration. Some of it's just having a good relationship with it, but you can't write. You're not going to maintain your audience if you're just out there writing puff pieces about things, and it's a short-lived. If you do that, you're not going to really keep them on. Now, there's certain types of articles that could be about an advertiser that it could be a good human interest story. I mean, there's fascinating people in the electrical market that happen to be advertisers, the backgrounds and some of the products. So if you do it right, it's okay to write about them, but you got to be doing it for the right. It's like a lot of things in life. You got to be doing it for the right reasons. If you think you're going to tell a good story about a product, about a company, about a person in the business, do it because it's good. It'll be interesting. It'll help the reader or in your audience. Like I say, run their company more profitably, sell more stuff. If you look at it through that lens, you can kind of, not to say some people don't, pander and that's what they want, but there's a way of doing it right, I think.
So I like to think of it kind of, looking through the lens of value, right?
Yeah.
Where can we bring value? What can we do that, not to ourselves, but, how do we bring value to others, or like in your case, to your readers or your subscribers? So the electrical industry, in my opinion, it obviously touches everybody, right? But I think a lot of times it's kind of not really top of mind, if you will. So I think it's interesting. Like you said, you can bring out interesting articles and different things that, there's a lot of hot topics today that revolve around the electrical industry that maybe people don't tie into, how you would tie it into electrical. They just kind of think it's a way of life. But so what are some of the top trends that you're kind of keying in on right now?
I think there's more things to write about now than ever. And some of it's a lot of different new markets, some of the new product opportunities that everyone in the business now has. When you think of everything going on with electrification, I think that touches distributors of all sizes. You think about certain electric vehicles, what's going on with renewables. Gosh, all the lighting has been kind of an evergreen. There's been stuff going on in lighting. I really think there's more, from a journalist or writer's point of view, there's more to be talking about than ever before. Certainly, merger and acquisitions. I could talk for hours on what's been going on with that, both the distributor level, now more and more the rep level, and certainly on the manufacturer side. So
dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
I guess tell me, what are your thoughts that are behind some of that?
Yeah. Well, it comes at an interesting time. We just posted we've done an annual ranking since the 70s anyway of the largest distributors, and we just finished what is now the top 100 distributors. And it used to be the top 150, but there were so many companies got acquired, we had to kind of slim it down. I mean, literally, I don't know.
So do you make the list if you're a distributor then? If they're shrinking?
Well, we still we want it to be of a certain size, and we still have people have to kind of qualify to get on it, and it's kind of depends what you consider a large company, but I have to say, since around 219, I think about 60 companies that had been on the list were acquired, most often by one of the major ones. So that kind of took a big scoop out. There's a lot of the sales shifting to some of the very largest companies. The Sonepars, the Wescos, the Rexels, Graybar, City Electric. Although they're more new. They do a lot of new branches rather than acquisitions. Border States is big right in town here. They bought years ago bought a very big company, Western Extralite.
Well, certainly, part of that's got to be just economies of scale.
Yeah.
You grow. Yeah. You can do more things more efficiently.
Yeah.
How much of it is that, and how much of it is just people retaring out of the market?
It can be an awful lot of that. I mean, historically, an awful lot of distributors. I mean, you had your rural I wouldn't say ancient, the real old. Some of them maybe they were started in the 20s or 30s, and it's okay. They might be up to their third, maybe fourth generation.
Sure.
But really, an awful lot of the companies, at least since I've been in the market since the 80s, very traditionally they might have gotten a startup sometime after World War II. Maybe some of the service people that came home started up the company. And it for many years, family-owned businesses, which really made it so cool just to get to meet some of the families and some of the stories. I mean, some of the people you meet, I'm sure you meet in your being out and around too. There's so many.
Well, it seems like the family-owned businesses are are dwindling,
Yeah.
to the big corporations. But
and that's been so. There's been a lot of that family-owned business people looking in it. Sometimes it can be hard, to get to have a son or daughter that want to take over the business and keep it going. But so and it can be, certainly with the larger distributors, there are volume purchasing deals that make it a little bit easier for the very large, the big chains, like I mentioned, like a Sonopar or a Gray Bar, some of the big ones. But that's really the way for since the 70s at least. The independents, family-owned companies have very often become member one of the buying groups, which is affiliate distributors or IMARC, and they pull their purchases and they get hopefully pretty close to a similar pricing for their products. Sure. So they can be blunt some of that, but there's an awful lot as a distributor that they have investments that they'll be needing to make. Well, in the computer systems, some of the new technology, digital storefront, maybe some of the, just to be able to do something like a podcast, just to do some marketing, So there's a lot more that goes into it. But I think there'll always be, there's definitely a role and a place for the smaller company. Now, how you might define small, it's getting bigger and bigger. I mean, there's a lot of companies on our list that are over 100 million in sales. And, back in the day, that was maybe considered a pretty large company. Mm-hmm. Now they're sort of middle of our rank. I mean, a company like a Wesco is up there with almost $20 billion in sales. And in North America, Sonopar's around $16 billion. And so the companies are just getting bigger and bigger, and Elliott Electric Supply, I laugh. I was putting a list together. I remember when Elliott, they bought, actually locally in Kansas City here, they bought Kansas City Electric Supply a couple of years ago. I think about 5 or 6 years ago, they made $1 billion in sales. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. That is something. They just topped $2 billion in 4 or 5. They took 25 years or maybe more probably for Bill to get it to $1 billion. And then within the next couple, he happens to be a big believer in branch expansion, not too many acquisitions. So there's ways to do it. I mean, I think there's always going to be, and some people prefer it. A lot of people prefer, I think, to buy, through an independent. Maybe they follow the relationships. They follow their favorite salesperson. I think in a lot of ways, and
I've noticed that over the years too. You may have a sales guy that may bounce around from one company to the next, but a good sales guy. People will follow them. It's all about relationships.
It really is. I think that's really, I find, kind of one of the cool parts of the business, and one of the reasons I think I've stayed in this line. It's a business industry of relationships and people, and you see they may, someone went this. I think it really applies. Someone told me he was in the wire and cable business, and we were laughing about how people don't. He didn't think people leave wire and cable. He's like, Jim. He goes, it's like Devil's Island. You're on the island in wire and cable. You might change cells, but you're still on the island. You're still in wire and cable. Yep. So and I think you could apply that to a lot of different parts of the industry.
Yeah, it might be doing the same thing with a different shirt on.
But
I kind of grew up in the telecommunications industry, and it's very similar in those regards because it's a very overall a pretty small network of people. You see the same folks at all the different shows, and somebody may bounce around from one place to another, but it's ultimately the same group of folks. So.
And and to me too, I like it. I think as even being a business journalist, when you get to maybe say if I've gone on to say a bigger magazine, everything's very filtered through the PR agency of the rep and what you can say, can't say. You don't get it as genuine. I mean, there's been so many funny stories I've had of visiting with a company and they'll take me out to their fishing club. It's real world, or come on, let's go play some handball before we do the interview. But that's just the way someone comes into their business, and that's how they do business. I kind of enjoyed it. I was looking at your website, and you had John Marietti had a video there, just saying when someone came into town, they would he'd entertain. They'd stay over at his house, and I said, that's I think that's what makes the business great. The people that still kind of works for in a lot of ways.
The one, I look up to John a lot of different ways, but when I think of John Marietti, I just think of, what a classy dude. He's just old school class all the way. And, I think we've lost a little bit of that era, in general. But it's nice to have guys like that around. So.
Well, I always, when I moved to Kansas City area when our magazines were bought up. What at the time was a small publishing company called Intertex. I had worked with McGraw-Hill for many years in New York. So we moved. They said, try it for a year, see if you like it. So my wife and I moved out with our 2 sons at the time. just coming into the market, and John was so good to me, just showing me around around the industry. But he was I wouldn't say I always remember one lunch I wrote something. He's like, you didn't have the perspective. He took me out to lunch. He said, you didn't have the perspective of the rep in that article. This is how you could have done it. And I was like, good for him. I was like, it was right. And but he was a classy guy. So
So you mentioned consolidation and distribution, but talk a little bit about consolidation in the rep market. Because I see a lot of that going on.
Oh yeah, and it's really ramped up over the last year or two for sure. I mean, there was always a lot of talk about some the super regional rep, and that might depend on how big the footprint might have changed. Whether it was the Southeast, Midwest, or some of the reps in California, very large. It might have been only 2 or 3 really major reps, but I think in the last couple of years, particularly, they're just looking to get a bigger and bigger regional footprint, and it's hard to really put in some cases, I think it's the manufacturer that says, hey, I don't want to have as many companies, and they'll have fewer reps for that certain company. Some of it, I think, is a little bit of the family business, as we talk. Reps very much a similar trend like that. But we've certainly seen, I don't know if you want to get into specific names, but there's been some pretty big name reps in the commercial industrial over the past year, at least 3 that I can think of that were acquired by a company called Forward Solutions that is kind of bringing reps in from all different types of all different industries. They have some, not back office, but some operational things they can handle centrally and let the reps stay out in the field and work with their people. So it sounds like a good concept. I think jury's still out. We'll see how it works in reality.
I think one of the questions I would have from a manufacturing side of view, I can see that it may simplify things. More direct lines of reporting, less less avenues to go there. But being a rep too, I know. It's all, like I said, it's all about relationships, and you've got certain people that have certain expertise. And so you may have, let's just say you got 10 sales guys on the docket, and, each manufacturer seems like they've kind of got a favorite. This guy's an expert at this, so obviously that manufacturer is like, man, how come everybody can't be like him? And then you've got another expert over here. So, I just question how they've got to be able to have that direct link, but still you got to have those relationships too. So there's always a dynamic there that kind of makes me wonder how that'll work.
Yeah, and I think I always I think it's really pretty old school, probably kind of evergreen. But I always figure whoever's the closest to customer is going to win. I mean, in the end, really. If there's another layer, if it's a larger larger rep or whatever, but it's still going to come down to the local relationships. I mean, being bigger doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have better relationships or maybe not even offer a better price or whatever. You got to really have the people that have the local. And I think it's even more particularly true with reps, I think, as well. And I think it's challenging. I mean, and I think it always been interesting in the rep world because you have everything from their very smallest company where someone has an entrepreneurial urge to go out on their own and they get a little package of lines and they might expand. You've got really good sized companies like yourself. And there seems to be another level of companies developing with maybe ideas of getting semi-national. And I don't hard to say where that will go or where that's going to be. And really some of it gets into, there was, I think it's what they think they say about 75 or 80% of all products, I think this is in commercial industrial, go through the rep at least in part, whether they'll have it independent or, a factory. And I think that'll be interesting to see where that all change, if the rep functional, how that's going to change. A lot will depend on the product and all, but I go back, I remember when companies like Eaton went to reps. That was a huge deal when they finally went over. What different companies as they just, decided to take it on.
Would you say the trend is manufacturing using more reps or using less reps?
I think more. Yeah, I think more, and I think a combination of things. I think and some of it I get. Well, some of it I think is there's some of the new products that come in, and I think it's some like you say just in lighting, commercial industrial lighting. I mean, there's so many new LED companies out there, and they're all looking for a way to get to market. So you see some of the smallest of companies that are coming up, but I do think, and as I mentioned, some of the big ones. I mean, companies that 20, 30 years ago, maybe that was a factory person that they had. I think they've gone over to reps. And I think really part of that, I think NEMRA has done, the National Electrical Manufacturers Reps Association has really done a good job of promoting the rep function to manufacturers to say, and putting on the events that they put on, particularly annual conferences, the networking, the meetings, the professional. It really puts reps in a really good light. I think that's all kind of worked together. I say for sure, more rather than less. I don't see the move toward a factory salesperson. There'll always be some companies that will believe in it in some markets, and maybe they have a really good person in that they can make it work. But
one place I know a lot of reps may struggle is just legacy planning. If it's a small family-owned business or whatever, how do you get out of that, or what's going to happen with the next generation? And that's the one thing that sets us apart with our ESOP. We've got that kind of built into the company structure, so there's it makes it easy when someone retires out of that top position and move on to the next. So I think that's pretty important for us for sure.
Yeah, I know. Just talking about some of the companies that got acquired real recently, some of the rep companies, and I know some of the biggest. And I was kind of surprised it didn't happen, but they hadn't informed all their manufacturers that they were going to get acquired. And I know that really, without mentioning names, that was a pretty big deal. That was a lot of talk about that because they were a pretty major vendor and they didn't necessarily.
Well, there's no guarantee. If you're buying another firm, there's no guarantee that contract's going to
and that was
transfer.
So that we'll have to see how that all goes. I think the jury will, but I think it's the way of the world, as you mentioned, with smaller companies as they deal with legacy issues. But I think the function of the rep makes perfectly good sense in so many ways, as long as they're up to the.
It's interesting to me, just how many people don't understand what a rep does. It's end user type of level people. They're like, okay, now what do you do? I understand Joe. He's with the distributor. And I understand Bob. He's with the manufacturer. But like, what do you do? And so we always try to take the opportunity to explain. What we do. Whether it's we don't always do direct sales because we're dealing with distributors and so on, but we're there for obviously spec position. We want you to buy our widget versus the competitor's widget, but we do a bunch of training and support and all of those types of things that people don't necessarily think about or see. So and the business model is pretty simple. We don't get paid unless we sell something, right? So it's a very cost-effective way for manufacturers to go to business. So. We got to keep the lights on, so we got to keep selling stuff.
And I think when you layer over too, by the type of products that a CBM sells, or like we see, being a lot of our market is traditional pipe and wire distributors, commercial, industrial, and you look in the lighting market. I mean, the lighting reps it wasn't all that long ago where you didn't necessarily see a C&I person have a big, broad line of lighting products. Now you have the LEDs, and now the controls they may or may not need. It might be part of the whole package, so that's a big deal. And then the real heavy duty lighting reps, it gets a whole different feel.
They're almost kind of more specialized. It's the lighting's one that's interesting to me because in my mind we're always told we should never have competing lines. But it seems like in that world there's kind of no way around it.
There's so many different.
Everybody's trying to get a piece of their mind share. So it's definitely a little bit different.
So many lines, so many different lines, so many got acquired and rolled up, but still you see a lot of independent lines out there for sure.
I wanted to take a second and explain what is a manufacturer's rep. It's still funny to me sometimes our role is often misunderstood, but in a nutshell, what a rep does is we are a subcontracted sales force for multiple manufacturers. Our lines are complementary to each other and not competitive. And what this does is, it often gives us the opportunity to sell a full line solution. So it really brings value to our customer when we can, represent product from one end to the other. We're not a distributor. We work with distributors to get our product to market, but we're really an extension of those factories. So just in a nutshell, if you're looking for a great manufacturer rep with years of experience and great folks, look us up at cbmrep.com. So talk to me a little bit. I know you got a couple of podcasts. Talk to me a little bit about each one, what their functions are, what you talk about, what you go through on each of those.
Sure. Yeah, no, I've got 2 going right now. I'll deal with the smaller one. I'm still kind of getting ramping up. I call it EW Executive Insights, and basically it's just do 1 or 2 a month. It's conversations with different folks in the industry just about their particular area of expertise.
Okay.
And we'll do 15, 20 minutes of my 30-minute podcast on that. And that's been going well. I've got a couple of good, like I said, did one this week. I've got a couple this summer. I was actually pretty busy with those. The one that's kept me pretty busy mostly now, and I'll be getting close to my 100th episode with, it's called Today's Electrical Economy. It's kind of nerdy, it's a lot of stats and stuff in there, but I came up and we put it together during the height of COVID. It was right. It was right in the middle of all that, and I said, at the time, there were people like, "Wow, what's going on with the economy? It's going to go up, down, sideways." So I tried to find some stats. I'm a kind of a stat geek a bit, so I found some weekly stats that I could put together and say, "Hey, freight rail shipments are up, down, or sideways. Unemployment claims, obviously, there's a lot of monthly stuff. Building permit." So I put it together, and I said, "Well, I cover new news, acquisitions, new projects, and all. I'll put a little bit of that together." And I did very crudely, I did a PowerPoint and narrated a PowerPoint. And myself and one of our regional salespeople who handle the sales side, we were able to sell it to one of our vendors for sponsorship. So, we're just did episode 98. So, but I like it, and I like we were talking earlier. The great thing about podcasts is when you really get the feedback from your listeners, and you say, "Yeah, it's in some ways flattering." You say, "Oh, there's a person that's listening." But when they have something to say, whether they speed up through certain parts of your podcast or they like that topic, or hey, could you cover this also? The feedback is terrific, and they're an awful lot of fun. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've listened to a few of them, and there's definitely a lot of data. But explain to me a little bit how some of that data relates. How do you? I understand globally and like how economically it works, but how do you narrow some of that data down to say just the electrical market?
Sure. Yeah.
Whether it's whether it's the unemployment or the rail cars or how do you narrow all that down to that sector?
One of the things that we've done electrical wholesale over the years, and one of my mentors, Andrea Herbert, who hired me back in the 80s, she was a mastermind. We do something called the Market Planning Guide, where we basically break down, through surveys and through local markets, try to give reps and distributors and readers an idea what the market potential might be very locally. Yeah. So with doing that, I just got real interest over the years, got real interested at saying, okay, here's Kansas City. How can I kind of paint a picture for someone that's maybe just trying to get a thumbnail of how big the market opportunity, what numbers are out there? So, and you can get electrical contractor employment, you can get overall unemployment, you can get building permits very locally. Population shifts, you can tell an awful lot. You can get it down to the county level of people moving in or out. That's kind of a pretty direct indicator on how building permits or how some of the other things might be doing there. But one of the things that we do on top of that, so you can get some raw data that in many cases through the Bureau of Labor Statistics or Bureau of Commerce, and then you can get we do some things where we'll get sales per employee. We kind of have an idea, say, okay, for every contractor employee out there, their overall market potential is, I think what's the number we use, about 80,000 per person. So you kind of get a general idea. Okay. And if we through some other survey work we've done of distributors, we said, what is your product mix? And we'll say, how much does wire and cable account for? How much does lamps account for? And it's very very national rule of thumb. But then you can start applying that if you're saying, okay, the whole market is X, and Kansas City is going to be different from Flint, Michigan, from Fort Myers. So it's going to be different. But you can kind of take some of those numbers out if it's available locally, and you can kind of paint a picture for the local market. And I think it's of interest to our readers because maybe they're looking to say, should I hire? Maybe it's for a new branch. Maybe I'm going to hire. Do I need to hire people? I need a third party source, kind of vetted with no axe to grind, and maybe a vendor is saying, hey, we think this market's worth this or that, and you can say, well, I don't know. I'm from this other source here is kind of these numbers say something differently. So I've just had a wonky interest in the kind of local market data, and I love checking.
But you do that for across the country.
Yeah,
right?
Not
just local to Kansas.
Yeah, and it's a database. We have this electrical marketing newsletter that I also do, and it's something that we sell for pittance really. But I do that. I collect all construction project data and just to kind of layer it on top of there to see and you can kind of start seeing some trends when you start.
The projects really determine what's going on in a local territory, correct? In terms
they do. And I have to say, for better or worse, mine are because of time constraints. I only look at the projects 100 million and up, which is I can understand can be that's pretty big. I mean, there's a lot of great projects that are very profitable, much under that. But just to kind of give people a general sense of what might be available out there. So,
what would you say the overall electrical economy is right now? Is it moving up, moving down?
It's decent. It's going to slow. I think I get this through surveys of our, when we did that top 100, I had about, say 80 companies came back and gave us a little feel for it. And I also I do a quarterly survey also to give us a sense. So I think people are expecting a slight slowdown end of the year, no recession, but I think a slight slowdown. I mean, I think there's some markets that are blessed with all these huge projects that we hear about, whether it's the data centers or the semiconductor plants. I mean, they're going to do much, much better, So, but I think overall, and it just kind of be dependent on their particular market. But the overall and this is on the distributor side, the average annual growth rate is between 4% and 8%. So, a couple points above inflation, more or less. So, whether inflation is going down,
it's on the right side of it.
Yeah. I think it's going to be decent. I mean, I think it's been pretty good demand, really. I was just looked at the construction figures, most recent that you can get out there, and I think it's going to end up being a decent year. It could end up being a great year for some people. They're in the right spots here, I think.
But you mentioned data centers, and obviously that's a hot topic for everybody. But what percentage of the industry is data centers?
That's hard. That's a good question. You can find, and I do aggregate as much data as I can to find the sizes of them. It's hard to say the total number, but I can say a number that I found really interesting, and I only found it from one source. But they said of a total, like if you see Google has a $500 million mid-sized data center, 500 million. This one source said it was 43% of that is electrical stuff, electrical equipment, which I think is gigantic. I mean, I would have never guessed that. I would have, because a couple of people have said, these total construction project, pipe and wire type of stuff. 10%, that's your rule of thumb. And it'll depend on how much lighting, how much security, how much whatever, but you figure 10% around it. But they were saying
40,
data.
Yeah, that's
it's crazy. I'm trying to get enough to vet that number, but I just saw that about a couple of weeks ago, and it's crazy good. I mean, right where we're sitting here, just around here, then also up near neck of the woods in Iowa, we're pretty darn good.
Iowa, we're plumb full of them, but it's interesting from a sales perspective. It can be difficult getting into the data center, getting to the right people, whether it's the right engineering firm or whether it's the owners directly. I think the contractors have certainly a better link to that because they're actually doing the work. But so many of these specs and different plans get done outside of someone's territory.
Yeah. Yes.
So how does someone break into that? What's the trick? I
see some people traveling with the data center. I know some of the, unfortunately, I guess for the Midwest, I know some of the reps and some companies out from California. They'll set up an office, right wherever. Yeah. They'll do some, hiring kind of locally. So it's funny you mention that because there's a local.
Because if you're trying to work within your territory and go by all of those rules and stuff, it makes it very tricky.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I got to connect. There's a local. Contractor in town, Max Electric, and I saw that he was on. He recently did a NECA presentation. They're a small, mid-sized contractor, but his title of his presentation was "How does a small contractor get into the data center game?" So it's kind of, I think it's kind of exactly what you're saying. I gotta flag him down when I see him at NECA to see. All right, what did you learn? What are you guys learning there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was just at a sales meeting recently, and one of the presentations they mentioned. I believe it was like 60% of the power in Virginia was all going to data centers.
It sounds crazy there. That whole western part of the west of the downtown, out to Loudoun County and out through Fairfield. I can't even imagine the amount that's going through. And it's you talk about the cooling of it, and it's an issue. And some of I know when you think of there, and there's a little bit of a surge in the Phoenix area. Obviously, some water issues in Phoenix.
Yeah,
at least how do you cool these things?
Yeah, we came across an article yesterday that was mentioning the water and the cooling and how much they're going through and even AI affecting that. Where they say you type in so many comments and now you're burning so many gallons of water.
They say but I hadn't heard that about the water too, but they say just the electrical power for a search, an AI search compared to a Google search is by it's exponentially more. And I don't have the number in front of me, but yeah. So and
where does it stop? That's my.
I don't know. It's just such a crazy. I mean, this whole AI thing is everyone's fascinated by it. I mean, from the stock market on down, it's just on fire. And so everyone's trying to figure out how it's affecting their own.
There's clearly some value in terms of production and speed and everything that it touches, but if we're burning gallons of water and piles of electricity, what expense do we? Keep going just so we can, look at Facebook or whatever. So,
you got good data and junk data, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Think of that.
Yeah. Well, so obviously that affects the data centers affect the electrical industry, but also the power utility.
Oh,
industry.
I can imagine. Yeah, the amount of
right now you've almost got to build a new substation, for every data center is kind of how it's looking. But I don't know, the sustainability of it is the question.
It's an amazing world. One of my sons, he's a project manager for NextEra Energy. So he kind of travels, and he did some wind sites up in northern Missouri. Now they have them on the solar sites down in Texas. And he was surprised how much the battery storage, he was saying. He goes, Dad, we have our backlog. It's like, oh, there's jobs I'll be working on for. It's amazing the amount that's going on and all. So
yeah. So the battery storage, talk a little bit about that. What does that look like, and what does it do for is he dealing? So he's looking at it for a utility, or is there private companies doing it? What does that market look like? Yeah,
his is a lot of their own utility storage. He's doing some local markets for it, really, but I haven't got too much specifics on the battery storage end of it. It was mainly the solar fields. He was just out on a big project out in New Mexico, Skywalker Ranch, I think it was called. I forget how many hundreds and hundreds of solar cells, but it was also a big, it was a utility scale project out there that they were also working on. He's down, I think this week's down near the Mexican border, San Angelo's, I think. But yeah, same type of thing. But he says more and more of their projects are having that built right in there as part
so
of the next era.
Essentially, they'll create the power when it's cheapest,
store it right on site there,
and then at peak time they'll use that cheaper energy to pull back into the grid. Correct.
It's a fascinating time right now because you're starting to hear more about nuclear power, these modular, smaller reactors, and some of these storage sites or some of the renewable sites might be right on the nuclear grounds. And I was reading something there saying there's lots of land around nuclear reactors. They got plenty of room to store stuff. I don't know, but there's so many things to be looking at. I really, it's like I say, I've never seen a time where there's been so many interesting things to learn about and to write about in the electrical market. It's been, it's fun like that. And that was the whole, it's like one of my I learned about nuclear power. It's kind of,
So, kind of wrapping up a little bit, kind of everything we've talked about. What do you think some of the biggest challenges we have moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's kind of an evergreen, age-old one. It's finding the right people, keeping them interested in the industry, and just motivating them to be part of your team. I think that we've always said that about the electrical market, and I think it's more true than ever. Good thing is, I think there's more interesting aspects of the market that I think can draw people in a bit more. I mean, we're talking about renewables or EVs or lighting, talking about the grid. There's more things that I think can resonate more. It's not all, I don't know if it was ever really just all the stuff behind the wall, where maybe it was a little harder to get folks excited about stuff that was behind the wall or in the ground and this is what you do. But I think it's got a little more juice, maybe a little more juice if that's the right word for it. So I think that's a big one for sure. That's number one. I think as we were talking too for mid-sized to smaller companies, just trying to figure the role as acquisitions get big. You got the big. I think that's going to become a bigger effect. I mean, the market is. I wouldn't say it's discovered by private equity, but I think it's going to be on the radar more and more with the whole electrification thing. That's kind of a big topic that because we do get certainly contacted, by different folks that are looking to buy and sell companies, and I think that's drawing more. It's going to be under the. I don't know if the microscope's the right word, but I think this acquisitions, I think, is going to be a big thing. I think that'll be as big. I think the role of AI. What is the role of it right now? Is everyone's talking about it for the big tech companies, Silicon Valley company. What about for a mid-sized company like a CBM or smaller your customers? What is that? I mean, are there things in processes? Are we going to be able to automate? I was listening I guess it was CNBC, and they were talking about, you've got your big global AI stuff, the big stuff, like Jason Wong and these massive things that can compute.
Some people are speculating that we're just going to be replaced altogether. I don't see that happening, but
what about the things like they'll have AI AI apps on your iPhone that maybe it does help you. Maybe it's in a trip or put together a quote. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. So I think that's going to, and I don't know where that's all going, but I think it'll affect companies of all sizes. It's not going to just be all the big techie firms that are going to be using the power of AI. So for good, better, or worse, So that's going to be the old balance that we talk about. You kind of touched on it earlier. Your magazine's been around since 1920. Mm-hmm. That's 104 years. So obviously you've been able to make changes and be flexible, how the world changes. And I think that's going to be a big challenge that's probably a challenge for any company, really. How do you stay relevant? I always tell people I learned to dance between the raindrops without getting wet. They go, how did you keep a career in journalism for 40 years? I was like, I don't know, man. I just kind of you got to move and groove. You got to just try to stay relevant, keep in touch with people, and just keep in touch with the market and the changes. Keep in touch with the people who really know the market.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a lot about that, or a lot about life, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. You mentioned earlier. You mentioned a mentor. Who's been a mentor and had a big impact on your life going?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, family members. My mom, obviously, mom and dad had good memories and good experiences. But it was one thing I do mention about my family. One of the ways I think I got into the electrical markets, my dad was involved in the construction industry in a different way. He was into surety bonds when they have to write a bond for a big project.
Okay.
And during the summers, a lot of times he would be able to engineer some summer jobs for the Lucy Boys on construction sites.
Yeah.
So I had some interesting jobs in construction. We could do another podcast on those. But anyway, so I had and I just always liked working with my hands and stuff. But that was something that I got going with, and I think I kind of blended that. Just like being around the construction, not being afraid to talk with people of all different walks of life. From anyone I worked at an offshore drilling rig. There's people there with out of prison, devil worshippers. It was just like, whoa, dude, I'm 2 miles out in the ocean. I got to get along with everybody here, you know? So, but so I think that kind of got me interested in the whole construction scene. I was able to blend it with some jobs I had in college when I was doing my master's at a Votech school, and I got interested in that. Did some studying about what high school kids thought about Votech school, and basically, as it came out, it was like the more they knew about the school, the more they liked it. If they didn't know anything about it, they didn't have much of an opinion or didn't think anything of it.
Yeah.
So, but as I moved into the electrical market, there's so many good people. I mentioned John Marietti was one locally. There was a guy by the name of Tom Preston, was one of the founders of Nemra, and he had a lot of, he was another person, just loved the market. There's just people, how you feed off of people with good energy, and he was someone that, he was one of the folks that founded Nemra with a guy by the name of Dick Knoll. He worked for wholesaling for a while. Andre Herbert was the one that did the market planning. George Gansimiller was the chief editor for about 30, 40 years, and he was just a big dude that was really well known and liked what he was doing, and it rubbed off on me, I think. So I've been lucky. I had people, publishers that have been real good and kind of made a home for me and kind of watched out for me, when they said, what's this little electrical wholesaling, and
well, it's interesting too that you're able to take what you love doing, the writing and journalism, and transfer that into something entirely different, and people, I think a lot of people are teachers at heart as well.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't teach in a school, but they, have that ability and that effect on people to teach.
I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. I don't know.
Well, if you figure it out, let me know. Yeah, I'm kind of in that same boat yet. So you don't want to quit.
No.
If you find something that you love to do and you got purpose in life, then, why stop?
Yeah, no, I like it. I look forward to coming to work every day. Always thinking about it. I always tell people I come up with some of my best ideas for articles. I'm in the shower just thinking about the day. What do I have to get done today? And you think things through, or
it's hard to
meet someone fun at a trade show or out on a job site, or you're like, oh, that's interesting, and you just you just go in a whole new jag. You just start thinking about how this might work into something or so.
What's your bench look like? Are you mentoring others to carry on, as you do?
Yeah, I do try. We have a mentoring program at Endeavor, which I've been active in. Our little electrical group, publishing runs pretty thin these days. So, but we do have a couple of young folks that are working primarily over at our sister publication, EC&M, and I try to help them out wherever I can on that. And when we're at shows together, to show them around. So I wish we had a little bit deeper bench, to be honest with you. But I do look forward to every opportunity that I can help some of the younger folks out.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I think we've covered a bunch today, but I can't thank you enough for coming in and joining us. It's been a great conversation. Where can everybody find your podcasts? Give them the names again. And
it's all available on ewweb.com, ewweb.com. It's Today's Electrical Economy is the one, and that's about 15 minutes or so, sometimes up to 20, and also EW Executive Insights, and that's also available on ewweb.com.
Awesome.
If you have a mind for hardcore data statistics on the market, that's electricalmarketing.com. $99 a year, can't beat it.
And you've got a list there too, like all the projects that you find, all that stuff's listed out.
That's all there. All downloadable spreadsheets and also. Those are my labors of love right now.
That's great. Well, we can't thank you enough.
Yeah.
Thanks again for joining us, and a special thanks to Jim. I really enjoyed our conversation, and you brought some valuable insight to us. Remember, if you need expert advice on a project or are looking for representation from a top-notch sales team, look no further than CBM. You can find us here at cbmrep.com, and thanks again for joining us on Power the Network.